This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 379, part 2, entitled Why Women Oppress Men Far Worse Than Vice Versa. Continuing straight on, you start giving your audience more details of the masculist case. The fluffy feminists are hypocrites. They have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for divorcing husbands that in many Western countries now, 2/3 of young men under 35 refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves. You tell your audience why you think these fluffy feminists are hypocrites. They are hypocrites because they want equal rights with men in the divorce courts, in the parliaments, but reject obligations with men in sharing out the burden of earning the living for the family by not bothering to get a career competent education in high school and college, expecting, fluffy style, to be able to parasite off the money and labour of some gullible, stupid manslave. These manslavers then divorce their husbands, often their 41st penis, and take him to the fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce court and have him financially massacred, losing custody of his kids with a 99% probability, losing his house to her so she can raise her kids in it, losing half his stuff to her, paying her child money to kids he will barely see, and often forced to pay alimony for life, with no legal nor moral obligation on his fluffy ex-wife to fip up and get a job so that she can remain a parasite of him after the divorce the way she was before the divorce. You tell your audience that manslavery is slavery so as to be hated, and that masculists have a hatred for fluffy parasites, for fluffy feminist hypocrites, and for the gender politicians who created these deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place. Now you twist the knife, ratcheting up the rhetoric and the passion level by saying, quote, young men are telling each other, don't marry, don't have kids. If you're stupid enough to do that, you will face a 1 in 4 chance of losing your kids, which are totally unacceptable odds. So don't have them in the first place. And don't by any means have a relationship with a fluffy parasite who only wants to manslave you, take your money, so she can sit on her fat parasitic ass and live off your labour. She is manslaver, and in the limit deserves to die. You say, manslavery is an abomination. The abolitionists of the 19th century in the northern states of the US thought Negro slavery was a moral abomination. The masculists of the 21st century think that manslavery is a moral abomination and aim to get rid of it by the general fipping of society, creating a FIP society, in which all young women are socialised by parents and taught by teachers and society that they are to fip up or pay a very heavy price of being manless, hence babyless, and rejected by society, which will be heavily masculisted in future years as masculist ideas spread through the society. You point out to your audience with a passionate voice that, quote, the fluffy feminist hypocrites have made modern marriage for men so toxic that they have become indirect genociders, since they have caused 2/3 of young men to reject marriage and paternity, so they have to be stopped, with bullets if necessary. Responsible males, masculist soldiers, will not tolerate that these feminazi bitches indirectly wipe out whole populations, which is what they are currently doing, so they have to be stopped. You now turn to the women in the audience saying, you women will now have to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws, for example, by men-fairing the divorce courts, for example, making custody of kids joint by default, throwing out alimony, etc., by legislating the para. Otherwise, men will continue to reject paternity, so that you women will be left babyless. So if you want to have a baby, then you had better vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws. The masculists reason that as women, You care more about being able to have babies than you do about keeping the deeply misandrous privileges you have in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. So you'll be prepared to give up those privileges in favour of persuading men to be fathers again, by being given men fair gender laws in the divorce courts, by being given the para, etc. Women's oppression of men is far worse than vice versa, because women's oppression of men lasts decades and is continuous, unrelenting. It's only because this oppression of men has been so universal that women take it for granted. Nearly all women think that men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. The masculists are saying to women that now that men have liberated women from household drudgery, women can now work, so must work, so that men can be freed from the traditional price of being a manslave to a woman in order to get regular sex from her, which is a very heavy price, that is, manslavery to a woman lasting decades. Masculists aim to raise the consciousness of both sexes, to see that the traditional role of the man as a manslave is a moral abomination that is no longer needed now that women have the pill and can work, so don't need to manslave men in order to stay at home with a full-time job of raising a dozen kids, as was the case over a century ago. Those times are past. In many countries now, women are having close to 1 kid per woman, so have a career window of half a century. So the masculists are telling women to fip up or die. Manslavery is slavery. Manslavery is a war issue, so that those women who don't fip up will eventually be killed by extremely angry masculist soldiers who will not tolerate manslavery of men by the hated fluffy parasites and the fluffy feminist hypocrites who run the divorce courts. Masculists push women to fip up, to become biconscious, that is, to have both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, so that feminists cease their monoconscious gender bias, so that they stop their nonsense that gender oppression is a one-way street. When to a biconscious feminist or masculist, it is obvious that women oppress men far more than vice versa. Returning now to the scene that opened this flyer, one can readily feel the frustration and anger of the masculist when faced with monoconscious feminazi bigots who know nothing about masculism and hence are unaware just how deeply women oppress men with their traditional expectations on men, expecting them to be man-slaves to women for decades, enslaving them for decades, sexploiting them for decades, oppressing them for decades. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 370 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.